Now, during lockdown, the UK endured the biggest slump we've seen in 300 years. So surely it's time for an economic bounce back. Well, that's roughly what we've seen. Britain's GDP, gross domestic product, the size of our economy, grew by a chunky 5.5% during the second quarter of this year, that is March to June. And the International Monetary Fund, no less, predicts the UK will grow 6.8% during 2021 as a whole. That's the fastest growth in the G7, beating every major advanced economy. But official figures out this morning show, as On the Money's been warning for weeks now, the British economy may have stalled. We can see in July there was actually an economic contraction compared to the previous month, with GDP down 0.1%. That's revised from a previous expansion. And then in August, we saw a GDP expansion of 0.4%. So these are not really bounce-back style numbers. The economic contraction we saw in July was actually quite shocking. It reflects in part the pingdemic, which stopped around 1 million of us going to work. Yet now firms face lingering supply chain bottlenecks, spiralling input prices, incoming tax hikes. And remember, there's no energy price cap for businesses. So manufacturers, steelmakers, other energy-intensive firms are set to suffer. Even for households, despite that price cap, energy bills have risen after the cap was raised this month, with another hefty price rise scheduled for later next year. So this ongoing energy crisis is impacting both business and consumer confidence. The British economy, unlike the US, Germany, and certainly unlike China, has yet to fully recover from this COVID pandemic. We can see the numbers here. Our service sector remains 0.6% smaller than it was compared to February 2020, when the pandemic began. Our manufacturing sector is a hefty 2.5% smaller. Our construction sector is 1.5% smaller, and the economy as a whole, total GDP, it's still 0.8% below where it was before the pandemic in 2020. So the British economy is struggling to reboot, and that means some economists are now ripping up their earlier predictions, drastically redrawing their estimates. There's growing concern, not least in light of these latest GDP numbers, that far from bouncing back, the UK could even be in danger of entering recession. That's 2 consecutive quarters of falling growth. As we go into Christmas, demand for consumer goods, energy and food will rise. Many firms with the best will in the world will struggle to cope. That won't only drive up prices and inflation, but further damage both consumer and, crucially, business sentiment. Amid supply chain issues and energy shortages, the chief economist of the Institute of Directors told On the Money last week that business confidence, without which investment doesn't happen, quotes, fell off a cliff in September. The IMF brushes aside suggestions Britain could soon face stagflation. That's the combination of inflation and economic stagnation. And I'm not saying either that a UK recession is likely. But credible people are at least now discussing that possibility, and so must we. And that's your On the Money question today. Could the UK go into recession?